My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the hum of the small jet's single engine. The customs officer's gaze, cold and unblinking, fixed on my carry-on, then on me. He wasn't looking at the clothes, but at the carefully packed truth hidden beneath them, a truth that could bring down an empire or bury me alive. The late flight, a forgotten charter to a forgotten corner of the world, was my last chance, and this man, with his neatly pressed uniform and his indifferent stare, was the final gatekeeper. "Anything to declare, sir?" he asked, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, yet carrying the weight of a silent threat. I felt the sweat prickle my hairline, knowing that a single wrong word, a flicker of hesitation, could unravel everything I had risked. It had all begun 3 months earlier, with a number that refused to balance. My life as a forensic accountant at Sterling and Finch had been a predictable rhythm of debits and credits, a world of elegant precision where every penny had a place and a purpose. I thrived in that order, my identity forged in the quiet certainty of accurate ledgers. Then came the Oakhaven account, a new client, impossibly wealthy, impossibly opaque. A routine audit turned into a labyrinth, and somewhere within its winding passages, I found it, a series of transactions. Small at first, then larger, moving through shell corporations like ghosts in the machine. They were designed to mimic legitimate investments, but the patterns, once I knew how to look, screamed of something far more sinister than a simple accounting error. I traced the initial transfers back to a network of offshore entities, a spiderweb of ownership obscured by layers of legal fiction. Each thread, when pulled, led not to a legitimate business venture, but to another holding company. Another postbox address in a tax haven I'd only ever read about. It was elegant, almost beautiful in its complexity, but the sheer volume of money, hundreds of millions cycling through, felt like a gaping wound in the financial ecosystem. What was I truly looking at? My first instinct was to report it. That's what we did at Sterling and Finch. We unearthed discrepancies, we presented solutions. I drafted a preliminary report, detailing the anomalies with clinical precision, highlighting the suspicious beneficiaries and the unusual velocity of funds. I believed in the system, in the integrity of the firm. I still believed in Thomas, the man who found the truth. I scheduled a meeting with a colleague, a man whose smile rarely reached his eyes, known for his ability to make problems disappear. He listened, his gaze fixed on a distant point beyond my shoulder, as I laid out the evidence. The carefully compiled spreadsheets, the red flags fluttering in the digital wind. When I finished, the silence in his opulent office stretched, thick and suffocating. "Thomas," he said, his voice soft, almost paternal, "I have a commendable eye for detail, truly exceptional." He paused, leaning forward just enough to make eye contact, his smile widening but still not reaching his eyes. "However, Oakhaven is a sensitive client, high value, and sometimes, Thomas, the most sophisticated financial structures can appear unconventional to the uninitiated." He pushed my report back across the polished mahogany, a subtle dismissal. He wasn't saying I was wrong, he was saying I was asking the wrong questions. I left his office with a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. The message was clear, delivered with the subtlety of a surgeon's scalpel: back off. My concerns were not just downplayed, they were actively discouraged. The corruption, I now understood, didn't just touch Oakhaven, it seeped into the very foundations of Sterling and Finch. The firm wasn't just overlooking it, they were complicit. And if they were, what did that make me? Undeterred, a growing sense of unease gnawing at my conscience, I began my own covert investigation. My office, once a sanctuary of order, transformed into a clandestine war room after hours. I started with Oakhaven's public filings, cross-referencing names, addresses, and corporate registrations, painstakingly building a network map on a secure, encrypted laptop I bought with cash. The firm's servers were too dangerous, too easily monitored. I was no longer just an accountant, I was a ghost in the machine, moving through the shadows of the financial world. I discovered that Oakhaven wasn't the numbers, once my solace, had become a cage of my own making. Each digit, each ledger entry I meticulously cross-referenced from my hidden drive felt like a silent scream echoing in the quiet of my study. The air itself seemed to thicken around me, no longer just the stillness of a late hour, but something heavier, more watchful. I felt it first as a prickle, a phantom touch on the nape of my neck when I walked the familiar path to my office. A car, a dark sedan, parked a little too long, a little too often, on the street adjacent to mine. Its windows, like obsidian mirrors, reflected nothing back but the distorted world. I dismissed it at first. The mind plays tricks when under duress, I told myself. Paranoia, a natural byproduct of digging where one shouldn't, but the feeling persisted, a cold current beneath the surface of my determined focus. The coffee shop barista, usually a whirlwind of cheerful efficiency, paused, her gaze lingering on me a beat too long before she handed over my usual black brew. Each incident, insignificant alone, began to weave a tapestry of unease. My internal investigation had progressed, a slow, painstaking unraveling of shell corporations and offshore accounts. The web was vast, intricate, and the deeper I delved, the more I understood the magnitude of what I had stumbled upon. The initial veiled threats from the firm's senior partner had morphed into something more subtle, more insidious. My computer, once a trusted extension of my will, now felt porous. Files seemed to open slower, saving took an extra beat, and once a cursor twitched on its own, a phantom hand guiding it across the screen before I blinked and it was still. I ran diagnostics, found nothing, yet the seed of doubt had been planted. I started taking precautions. Different routes to work, checking mirrors obsessively, leaving my phone in a Faraday pouch when discussing sensitive information with the one colleague I still felt I could trust, a junior analyst who, through an email exchange, had hinted at similar suspicions. We had agreed to meet to compare notes, a clandestine rendezvous born of necessity. The location, a highway rest stop, exchange point just off the interstate, a place of transient faces and anonymous vehicles. It felt fitting, a place between destinations where secrets could be passed unseen. The drive out there was a study in heightened senses. Every car that pulled alongside me, every pair of headlights in my rearview mirror became a potential threat. My grip on the steering wheel was tight, grip tight. I doubted myself, my resolve. Was I truly seeing things, or was the stress simply manifesting as a distorted reality? The thought was a bitter pill, but I forced it down. No, the numbers didn't lie, and neither did the gnawing certainty that had taken root in my gut. I pulled into the highway rest stop, exchange point as dusk bled across the sky, painting the clouds in bruised purples and oranges. The parking lot was half full, a scattered collection of sedans, SUVs, and a few long-haul trucks idling in the distance. I scanned the area, searching for the junior analyst's familiar compact car. It wasn't there. A knot tightened in my stomach. I parked in a secluded corner, under the weak glow of a sodium lamp, and waited. Minutes stretched, each one a drumbeat against my ribs. My phone vibrated. An unknown number. Only the faint crackle of a distant signal. Then a click. The line went dead. My hand trembled as I lowered the phone. They knew. They weren't just watching, they were toying with me. It cruised slowly, its headlights sweeping across my parked vehicle before settling into a spot several rows away. The driver didn't get out. I couldn't make out their face through the tinted windows, but I felt the weight of their gaze. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't paranoia. This was a statement. The junior analyst hadn't shown up because they had been intercepted, or perhaps worse, they were never truly on my side. The weight that doesn't add up moment hit me with the force of a physical blow. The email exchange, the shared suspicions, had it all been a clever ruse to draw me out, to gauge my commitment? Reveal/discovery. A small, red blinking light caught my eye. It was nestled almost imperceptibly beneath the rear bumper of my own car, a tiny, malevolent eye staring back at me. A tracker. They hadn't just followed me here. They had been with me the entire way. My movements, my home, my every secret journey, all compromised. It was a man I recognized, not from the firm, but from a fleeting glimpse in the lobby of a downtown office building I had visited weeks ago while tracing a particularly evasive shell company. He had been standing by the elevator, a nondescript suit, unremarkable face, but his eyes had held a peculiar intensity as they swept over me. Now he paused by the sedan, exchanging a brief, almost imperceptible nod with the unseen driver before turning his gaze directly towards my car. There was no menace in his posture, no overt threat, just a quiet, unwavering observation. He was not there to confront me, he was there to confirm, to watch me realize I was caught. My breath hitched. The air in my car felt suddenly thin, suffocating. They weren't just aware, they were here. They wanted me to know. This wasn't about intimidation anymore. It was about control, about showing me the extent of their reach. The junior analyst, if they were involved, was a pawn. If they weren't, they were likely in far greater danger than I was. I started my engine, the roar a jarring sound in the quiet lot. My hands were steady now, a strange calm settling over me, replacing the fear. The game had changed. I was no longer just an accountant digging into anomalies. I was a target. And targets I knew could fight back. They thought they had me cornered, but they had only lit the fuse. The silence of the deadline still echoed in my ears, a phantom chill. It had been a deliberate act, that click, a punctuation mark on an unspoken threat. They knew. The words hung in the air of my small study, heavy as lead. My hand, still cradling the phone, trembled. I tried to rationalize, to dismiss it as a prank, a crossed wire, but the cold dread that had seeped into my bones refused to budge. It was a serpent coiling in my gut, tightening with each passing second. The meticulously arranged files on my desk, once a source of comfort, now felt like a betrayal. Each ledger, each coded transaction, a thread in a web I had unwittingly stumbled into, and now that web was tightening around me. I needed air, space, a moment where the walls didn't feel like they were closing in. I left the house, the quiet hum of the evening street a stark contrast to the storm raging within me. My drive was aimless at first, then I found myself turning onto the familiar exit, drawn by an unspoken need for anonymity. The vehicle coasted into the sprawling lot of the highway rest stop, exchange point. Diesel fumes mingled with the faint scent of stale coffee and distant pine. Trucks idled, their engines a low thrum against the twilight. The world felt distant, a film playing behind a pane of glass. My phone, a cruel gesture, chose that moment to ring, not the anonymous caller, but a number etched into my memory, a lifeline. It was the wife. Where are I? It's the daughter. Something happened. The serpent in my gut lurched, its fangs sinking deep. My world tilted. What happened? Is she all right? The words clawed their way out of my throat, raspy and desperate. At pickup, just now I was waiting, he was coming out with her friend, laughing, and then, this car, it came out of nowhere, not even slowing down. It swerved Thomas right towards them. The driver, he just kept going, didn't even brake. It missed her by inches. Her voice cracked, dissolving into ragged sobs. She fell. She's got a scraped knee, but it was so close, too close. This wasn't an accident. This was a message. What else? Him bear Thomas, her little worn bear, the one she takes everywhere. It was lying right there by the curb where the car had swerved. But she didn't have it with her. I swear she left it in her room this morning, and it had a tiny red ribbon tied around its neck. A new one, a near miss. A beloved toy, inexplicably present, adorned with a specific, unnatural detail. My breath hitched. This was no random act. This was precision. A calculated display of power. An undeniable warning. They hadn't just watched me. I slammed the phone down, the sound echoing in the confined space of my vehicle. My hands gripped the steering wheel, gripped tight. The serene mask of the highway rest stop, exchange point, shattered, revealing the sinister undercurrent beneath. My mind raced, a maelstrom of fear and fury. I burst through the front door, the scent of lavender and warmth doing little to soothe the ice in my veins. The wife met me. Her eyes red-rimmed, her face pale. The daughter sat on the sofa, a small bandage on her knee, her usual vibrant energy dimmed by a lingering tremor. She clutched her worn bear, its familiar plush fur a stark contrast to the incongruous scarlet ribbon tied tightly around its neck. I knelt before her, my heart aching with a pain I hadn't known possible. "My little love, are you truly all right?" She nodded, her lower lip quivering. "The car was so fast," Papa roared. I took the bear from her small hands, my fingers brushing against the rough texture of the ribbon. It was a deep, almost blood-red satin tied in a neat, deliberate bow, a foreign object utterly out of place. This wasn't a child's forgotten toy. This was a calling card. This was them. "Wait," I murmured, my gaze fixed on the bear. The wife's words echoed. She didn't have it with her. I told her to put it away. And yet there it was at the scene, adorned. It didn't add up. Not as a simple accident. Not as a coincidental loss. This was choreographed. A meticulous, cruel performance. A wave of profound exhaustion washed over me, heavy and suffocating. My earlier resolve, the quiet determination to expose them, felt like a child's toy sword against a dragon. What had I done? Had my pursuit of justice, my stubborn refusal to let these financial ghosts remain buried, led me to this? Had I, in my naive arrogance, placed my family in the crosshairs of monsters? The thought twisted in my gut, a bitter poison. Perhaps I should just stop, retreat, disappear. Let them have their hidden empire, their ill-gotten gains. I was a number cruncher, not a warrior. The weight of their malevolence felt crushing, my own strength insignificant. But then I looked at the daughter's tear-streaked face, saw the lingering fear in her innocent eyes, and a flicker, small at first, then growing into a searing inferno, ignited within me. This wasn't about numbers anymore. This wasn't about abstract justice. This was about them, my world, my everything. They had crossed a line, violated an unspoken sanctity. They had shown me their monstrous face, and in doing so had revealed a strength within me I hadn't known existed. The fear didn't vanish, no, it morphed. It hardened into something sharp, something unyielding. This was no longer a game of uncovering hidden ledgers. This was a fight for survival, for their survival. I would not cower, I would not retreat. The meticulous number cruncher had been pushed to the precipice, and from that edge, a different man emerged. They thought this was a warning to make me stop. They were wrong. This was an awakening. I would fight them, not with spreadsheets alone, but with every fiber of my being. And I would start by understanding exactly what kind of monster could target a child. The red ribbon, so innocent in its color, was now a brand, a promise. I would unravel their entire bloody tapestry, thread by painstaking thread, until they had nowhere left to hide. Murmured, the word catching in my throat like a shard of glass. My daughter, her innocent joy, had been twisted into a conduit for their vile message. This wasn't just about numbers anymore. It was a shadow stretched across my own threshold, a breath on the nape of my family's neck. The soft plush of the bear suddenly felt heavy, sinister, a stone in my gut. My gaze drifted to her small, sleeping form in the back seat, her chest rising and falling with the gentle rhythm of childhood dreams. A tremor started deep within me, not of fear, but of a cold, unyielding resolve. I would not let this stand. I clutched the bear, the red ribbon a stark, violent slash against the muted fabric. My firm, once a fortress of integrity, was compromised. My colleagues, once allies, were either blind or complicit. My mind, usually a precise instrument for auditing ledgers, sifted through faces, past connections, discarded contacts. One name surfaced, a phantom from a forgotten professional life, a journalist, sharp-edged and relentless, who had once hounded my firm over a minor scandal, a woman whose integrity I had begrudgingly come to respect, even as I parried her questions. He was known for chasing ghosts, for digging up truths others wanted buried. He was also, I knew, fiercely independent, a lone wolf in a pack of corporate reporters, often at odds with her own editors. Perfect or perfectly insane. The call was made from a burner phone bought in cash, its plastic shell feeling alien in my hand. My voice, when I spoke, was a low rasp, carefully modulated, devoid of my usual precision. Her voice on the other end was a gravelly murmur, seasoned with skepticism. But beneath it, a flicker of professional curiosity. We settled on a rendezvous, a time and a place chosen for its anonymity, its transient nature a highway rest stop, exchange point. The hours leading up to the meeting stretched like taut wires. I worked feigned normalcy, my mind a tempest of calculations and contingencies. I compiled a discreet package, copies of the most damning, yet untraceable, documents, a concise summary of my findings, stripped of any personal identifiers, a breadcrumb trail designed to peek without exposing. My hands shook as I slipped the thick envelope into a plain manila folder. There was this madness. There was I simply trading one dangerous path for another, dragging an innocent party into my vortex. The image of the red ribbon flashed in my mind. No, this was necessary. This was the only way. The night air at the highway rest stop. Exchange point was thick with the smell of exhaust fumes and damp earth. Headlights swished past, painting brief, stark portraits of weary travelers. The place hummed with a transient anonymity, a perfect backdrop for a clandestine exchange. The driver's side door opened and a figure emerged. It was her, the journalist. Taller than I remembered, her silhouette sharp against the distant highway lights. She wore a practical trench coat, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her eyes, even from this distance, seemed to bore into the surroundings, assessing, cataloging. She moved with a quiet confidence that both reassured and unnerved me. I stepped out of my car, my hands shoved into my pockets, the folder a lead weight beneath my arm. We met halfway between our vehicles, the vast, empty asphalt stretching around us like a stage. No greetings were exchanged, no pleasantries offered, money laundering, on a scale that defies belief. And it leads to unsavory elements. She raised an eyebrow, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Unsavory is my bread and butter. Give me the details, accountant, make it worth my time. Her tone was laced with a familiar skepticism, but I detected a subtle shift, a predatory glint. I handed her the folder. This is just the tip, but it's enough to prove the existence of the iceberg. She took it, her fingers brushing mine, cool and firm. She opened it, scanning the pages under the faint light. Her brow furrowed, her lips thinned. These transactions, offshore accounts, shell corporations, she murmured, her voice losing some of its initial skepticism, replaced by a growing intensity. She looked up, her gaze piercing. This isn't just about dirty money. This pattern, the names, the way the funds are routed. I've seen something like this before, a few years back. A shipping magnate vanished without a trace. His company was tied up in something similar, though nowhere near this sophisticated. Everyone called it suicide. I always thought otherwise. My breath hitched. Vanished. His associates too, one by one. It was all swept under the rug. No one could ever prove anything. Because if this is what I think it is, Iran not just playing with fire. This wasn't just a financial crime. It was a beast with teeth and claws, capable of devouring lives. The red ribbon on the bear. A stark warning now felt like a prophecy. He had seen their work before, seen the consequences. My resolve, though unwavering, now felt incredibly fragile. Had I truly understood the magnitude of the danger? Had I just signed my own death warrant, and perhaps hers, by seeking help? I finally said, the words a raw confession. They came from my family. Her expression softened just for a fleeting moment, before hardening again. Then we move carefully, she said, voice dropping even lower. I'll look into this, but I stay hidden. Don't contact me unless it's absolutely critical. And if something happens to me, make sure this information gets out. I understand. I nodded, the weight of her words settling heavily on my shoulders. The transaction was complete. An unlikely alliance forged in the dimly lit anonymity of a highway rest stop, exchange point. As he turned to leave, him trench coat swirling around him, he paused. One more thing, Thomas, he said without turning back. The shipping magnate, his daughter, she received a small red teddy bear shortly before he disappeared. The bear, the ribbon, it wasn't just a calling card. It was a signature. And it meant they had been watching for far, far longer than I had ever dared to imagine. The highway rest stop, exchange point, lay hushed beneath a sky bled of all colors save for the bruised purple of pre-dawn. My car, a silent sentinel, hugged the farthest corner of the lot, its engine cooled to a whisper. I watched the lone convenience store, its fluorescent glow a sickly beacon against the encroaching gloom, and the scattering of trucks that hummed with restless slumber. The air tasted of diesel and dread, a metallic tang that settled on my tongue, mirroring the apprehension that coiled in my gut. He had promised a glimpse, a fragment, a piece of the puzzle that might shift the entire board. Be at the exchange point. His garbled voice had crackled over the secure line, before the first light bleeds the east. Watch the old white van, cargo door ajar for a fleeting moment. My fingers, usually so steady with columns of figures, trembled slightly on the steering wheel. A pair of headlights cut through the gloom, too fast for the winding approach, too precise for a casual traveler. It wasn't the white van. Two figures emerged, their movements fluid, unnervingly coordinated. The other, leaner, lingered by the passenger side, his head turning slowly, systematically towards my vehicle. My breath hitched, a ragged knot in my throat. This was not the contact. This was not the exchange. This was the hunting party. My mind, usually a precise instrument, fractured into 1,000 shards of panic. The lean figure began to walk, his stride purposeful, direct. He wasn't looking for me. He was looking at me. He knew, before I could even shift into reverse. The passenger door was yanked open. A powerful arm, corded with muscle, snaked around my chest, pulling me backward, away from the controls. The air left my lungs in a gasp. Thomas, a voice gravelly and devoid of inflection, breathed into my ear, "A word with you." The bulkier figure was already at the driver's side, his hand reaching for the door handle. My world tilted. This wasn't a warning, it was an abduction. My meticulous life, the ledgers, the spreadsheets, the carefully constructed facade of normalcy, shattered. A surge of pure, animalistic fear, sharp as broken glass, propelled me. I twisted, a sudden, desperate contortion, my elbow striking something hard, a jaw, a nose I didn't know. The arm around me loosened, just for a fraction of a second. It was enough. I slammed my foot onto the accelerator, not caring that the car was still in park. The engine screamed. I then jammed the gearshift into reverse with a violent shove. Tires squealing as the car lurched backward, throwing the lean assailant off balance. He stumbled, his grip on me broken. As the car screeched, backing wildly out of the parking spot, the bulky figure, now fully at my driver's window, lunged. His hand, a blur in the dim light, plunged through the open window, snatching at my arm. His fingers, thick as sausages, closed around my wrist, pulling with incredible force. My head slammed against the headrest. Pain shot up my arm, but I held on, my other hand still gripping the steering wheel. This was it. This was the end. In the desperate tug-of-war as he tried to drag me from the car, something slipped from his grasp. It landed with a soft thwack on my lap, wedged between my thigh and the seatbelt buckle. The bulky figure, unable to maintain his footing against the accelerating vehicle, was forced to let go. He stumbled back, cursing, as my car veered wildly, narrowly missing a parked truck. Sedan's lights flared in my rearview mirror, already turning, already pursuing. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I pushed the pedal to the floor, my car a trembling missile hurtling down the exit ramp, merging onto the deserted highway. Only when I was miles away, my breath still ragged, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs, did I dare slow down. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely retrieve the object. It was a data chip, no larger than my thumb, encased in black, hardened plastic. No labels, no markings save for a single, almost imperceptible etching on its surface. A stylized lion's head, its mane rendered in intricate, almost fractal patterns. I knew that symbol. I had seen it in the periphery of the laundered ledgers, a recurring motif on shell company documents, a watermark on encrypted communications I'd only ever glimpsed in passing. It was the syndicate's silent, brutal crest. My fingers, still trembling, found the concealed port on my secure burner phone. With a click, the chip slid home. They hadn't wanted to talk. And I, Thomas, the careful, meticulous accountant, had stumbled into their lair, only to emerge with a piece of their very heart. This wasn't just evidence, it was a declaration of war. My old life, my quiet existence, it was gone, incinerated in the screech of tires and the desperation of an escape. I was no longer an investigator. I was a fugitive. Now, the small, cold chip in my palm felt like a pebble snatched from a forgotten stream, yet its plastic shell was a trivial barrier against the immense weight it carried. The chill of the night air outside the firm's abandoned annex still clung to my clothes, a memory of the shadows I'd navigated. I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that holding it meant I was marked. My careful, ordered world, built on columns of figures and the quiet hum of certainty, had begun to fray at the edges, pulled apart by unseen hands. The summons arrived like a serpent's hiss in my inbox, urgent meeting managing partner's office. The words, stark against the white screen, felt less like an invitation and more like a command. My fingers hesitated over the keyboard, a premonition coiling in my gut, a sour taste in my mouth. I walked into the polished mausoleum of power, the managing partner's office, where the scent of aged leather and ambition hung heavy in the air. The mahogany gleam of the table reflected my unease, a distorted mirror of my own apprehension. The managing partner, his face a mask of professional disappointment, sat opposite me. Next to him, the head of operations, a man whose smile usually felt like a veiled threat, now wore a grim, unyielding frown. Irregularities that, I'm afraid, point directly to I. A large screen flickered to life, bathing the room in an icy blue glow. It displayed a cascade of documents, forged emails, fabricated ledger entries, wire transfer logs. My name, emblazoned across the fraudulent papers, felt like a brand searing itself into my vision. Embezzlement, corporate espionage. The words hung in the air, heavy and damning, echoing the very accusations I had sought to expose. These transactions, the head of operations intoned, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, pointing to a series of transfers to an offshore account I'd never seen before, bear my digital signature. Funds diverted from client accounts, routed through shell corporations. A sophisticated scheme, Thomas. My breath caught in my throat, a knot of ice forming in my chest. I stared at the screen, my mind racing, trying to reconcile the meticulous order of my life with the chaotic, criminal tableau before me. I saw a date on one of the wire transfers, a Tuesday, 2 months prior. My mind, even in the grip of rising panic, clung to details. I remembered that day vividly, my daughter's school play, a rare afternoon I'd taken off, a promise I had kept. I had been nowhere near the office, nowhere near a computer capable of such a transaction. It was a small detail, a tiny pinprick in the elaborate tapestry of lies, but it screamed at me, "This is not real. This cannot be real." Yet the fabricated evidence was so meticulously crafted, so outwardly convincing, each timestamp and account number seemingly flawless. I tried to speak, to protest, to articulate the glaring inconsistency, but the words withered in my throat, tangled by disbelief and a rising tide of panic. How could they have known? How could they have moved so quickly, so decisively? Effective immediately, your employment with the firm is terminated. We will, of course, be cooperating fully with the authorities. The world tilted. The polished office, the grim faces, the damning evidence, it all blurred into a surreal nightmare. They stripped me of my access, my office key, my very identity within those hallowed walls. The badge, once a symbol of trust, was now a useless piece of plastic, a relic of a life that no longer existed. I walked out into the indifferent city, a ghost among the living. The weight of their accusations pressing down on me. My phone, once a lifeline, now felt like a lead weight in my pocket. I couldn't call my wife, not yet. Not with this poison clinging to me, this black stain on my name. The thought of her face, twisted by confusion and pain, was a sharper blade than any accusation they could hurl. How could I explain? How could I protect her from the fallout? The choice, agonizing and immediate, was clear. I had to distance myself, to become an island until I could clear my name. The thought of the space that would open between us, a chasm of unspoken fears, was almost unbearable. I drove, the city lights blurring into streaks of despair, until the highway stretched out before me, an endless ribbon of asphalt leading to nowhere, or perhaps everywhere but home. I found myself pulling into a highway rest stop, exchange point, the kind of transient place where lives intersect for a fleeting moment before scattering again. The air here was heavy with the exhaust of passing trucks and the faint, sweet scent of pine, a stark contrast to the sterile, air-conditioned world I'd just left. The small data chip, still nestled in my pocket, felt like a burning coal, a constant reminder of the truth they had tried to bury beneath a mountain of lies. I was ruined. My career, my reputation, perhaps even my family shattered. The world had turned its back, branded me a thief, a traitor. I was alone, adrift in a hostile sea. But as I stared out at the endless stream of headlights on the highway, each one a fleeting glimpse of a life I no longer possessed, a stubborn ember of defiance flickered within the ashes of my despair. They had taken everything, but they hadn't taken this. Not yet. And with it, a sliver of hope, a desperate promise of retribution. The silence that swallowed me was not gentle. It was a hungry maw, echoing the hollow space where my badge used to rest. Stripped of access, of the very digital tendrils that connected me to my life's work, I felt like a ghost haunting familiar halls. The polished office, the grim faces of my former colleagues, the damning evidence I had unearthed, it all blurred, a nightmare etched onto the waking world. My key, once a small weight of belonging, now marked me from the pocket of a discarded coat. They had taken the tools, but not the mind that wielded them, not the eye that saw the whisper of numbers, the silent song of deceit. I retreated into the quiet corners of my own thought, the only sanctuary left. The world outside, a blur of city lights and indifferent faces, seemed to rush by, unaware of the chasm that had opened beneath my feet. My family, shielded by a fragile ignorance, became the anchor in a storm I could not yet name. My initial attempts to piece together a coherent counter-strategy felt like grasping at smoke. I was a cartographer without a compass, navigating a landscape I knew intimately, yet now saw only through a fog. But then, a flicker. A pattern, once dismissed as an anomaly, began to hum with a discordant truth. It was a series of small, almost insignificant transactions, buried deep within a subsidiary's quarterly reports. A subsidiary I had only glanced at, deeming its activity too minor to warrant deep scrutiny during my initial sweep. These were micropayments, routed through a series of offshore accounts, all terminating in a single, unremarkable shell corporation. What caught my eye now was not the amounts, but the timing. Every third Tuesday of the month, without fail, a cascade of these tiny transfers would begin, culminating just before the global markets opened in a specific time zone. It wasn't about the money itself, it was about the signal. These weren't actual transactions meant to move capital, they were digital breadcrumbs, a coded message disguised as financial noise. They were instructions, a silent communication network operating beneath the surface of legitimate finance. The reveal struck me with the force of a physical blow. The recipient, Shell Corporation, seemingly dormant, was merely a relay. The true destination, the ultimate beneficiary of these coded signals, was the primary holding company at the very apex of the laundering scheme, and the person orchestrating this intricate, almost poetic ballet of numbers. It could only be one individual, whose name, though unwritten in the ledgers, was now screaming in my mind. This wasn't merely about moving money. It was about controlling the flow of information, the very pulse of the operation. The person who controlled these signals controlled the syndicate. My determination, once a simmering ember, now roared into a bonfire. I had no access to the firm's servers, no secure lines, no team. But I had my memory, my understanding of their system's architecture, and the undeniable truth embedded in those tiny, rhythmic transfers. My plan began to coalesce, intricate and audacious, like a complex equation solving itself in my mind. I needed to create a tremor in their carefully constructed edifice, a disruption in their silent communication, forcing their hand, exposing their central nervous system. The first step was to mimic their signature, to introduce a false signal into their network. If I could replicate the pattern of those microtransactions, but alter a single, crucial variable, I could trigger a cascade of misdirection, a financial phantom limb that would send their operatives scrambling. It was a high-stakes gamble, a digital forgery that, if successful, would sow distrust and chaos within their ranks, compelling the true architect to reveal themselves in an attempt to correct the perceived error. But how to inject this signal? I couldn't access their internal systems. The answer lay in their Achilles heel, their reliance on the very public, yet easily manipulated, global financial infrastructure. I would use the highway rest stop, exchange point. It was a place I had noted in my initial, meticulous research, a recurring physical drop-off point for sensitive, untraceable data drives, disguised as mundane package deliveries. It was where the digital met the tangible, a vulnerable nexus in their otherwise ethereal network. The hours blurred into a sleepless vigil, my fingers dancing across a makeshift keyboard, reconstructing fragments of data, crafting the precise sequence of dummy accounts and transaction values. Each digit was a brushstroke, each transfer a carefully placed word in a coded sentence. Had I truly seen what I believed? Was I overinterpreting? What if my carefully crafted signal was merely static, lost in the vast noise of global finance? The stakes were astronomical. A misstep would not only lead to my demise, but potentially endanger my family. But the image of their faces, clear and precious, pushed the doubt aside. I had to try. The air hung heavy and still as I drove, the city lights receding into a distant glow. My breath hitched in my chest, a tight knot of apprehension. The car, a borrowed anonymity, felt like a cocoon of fragile steel. The mandatory location, the highway rest stop, exchange point, appeared as a muted beacon in the pre-dawn gloom. A solitary gas station, its neon sign flickering, stood sentinel over a desolate parking lot. A few idling trucks hummed, their drivers lost in sleep or contemplation. My hand, steady despite the tremor in my gut, reached for the small, innocuous package on the passenger seat. Inside, nestled among layers of innocuous packing peanuts, was a discreet, encrypted data chip. My instructions were precise, derived from a pattern of observed activity. Locate the yellow parcel locker, second from the end. Its door would be slightly ajar, a silent invitation. This wasn't a direct confrontation, it was a ghost in the machine, a whisper in the dark. I was planting the seed of chaos, hoping it would blossom into the truth. My gaze swept the empty spaces, searching for any sign of watchful eyes, any indication that my presence was noted. The distant rumble of a passing truck was the only sound for a long moment. I walked with deliberate, unhurried steps towards the row of parcel lockers, my heart thrumming a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The yellow locker stood exactly as predicted, its door a fraction open, a silent invitation to an unseen exchange. With a practiced ease, I slipped the package inside, the soft thud a final, irrevocable declaration. The package, a seemingly innocent delivery, now held the potential to either unravel a criminal empire or seal my own fate. The countermove had begun. Stripped of access, of the very digital tendrils that connected me to my life's work, I felt like a ghost haunting familiar halls, but a ghost with a burning purpose. My office, once a fortress of order, was now a tomb of lost connections. Yet I had anticipated this excision. The meticulous mind that had once charted the serpentine paths of illicit money had also, in quiet desperation, carved out an escape route. Deep within a borrowed, unassuming laptop, humming softly in the hushed confines of my temporary, anonymous dwelling, lay the culmination of my clandestine efforts. Days blurred into a single frantic night as I refined the digital package. Each line of code, each spreadsheet, each encrypted file was a shard of truth, polished to a razor's edge. I had mirrored the company's servers, not perfectly, but enough to reconstruct the mosaic of deceit. The shell corporations, the offshore accounts, the staggered transfers, a symphony of fiscal malfeasance, all laid bare. The key was a series of transactions, masked as legitimate investment returns from a fictitious tech startup, which funneled millions through a bank in the Cayman Islands to a holding company registered in Delaware, its true ownership veiled by layers of corporate opacity. I knew the specific account numbers, the names of the puppet directors, the dates of the largest transfers. This was the heart of the beast, pulsing with ill-gotten gains. My fingers, usually precise, now trembled with a nervous energy that vibrated through my bones. One misplaced keystroke, one corrupted file, and everything would unravel. My breath hitched, a shallow, ragged sound in the quiet room. The screen glowed, a cold sentinel in the encroaching pre-dawn gray. I compressed the data into an impenetrable archive, secured by a passphrase only the detective and I knew. It was a digital lifeline, heavy with the weight of futures. A burner phone, its existence ephemeral, vibrated once, a silent message sent to the detective, a coded signal, a time and a place. The reply, equally terse, confirmed the rendezvous. The air outside was a biting knife as I drove, the engine's drone a monotonous counterpoint to the frantic rhythm of my heart. The world was waking, a smudge of bruised purple on the horizon, but my world was already in full, terrifying motion. The highway rest stop, exchange point loomed ahead, a beacon of anonymity, a crucible for my fate. I parked near the far edge, observing. My eyes scanned the sparse vehicles, the lone truck driver stretching, the hurried woman grabbing coffee. I clutched the small, innocuous USB drive in my pocket, its plastic casing a fragile container for such explosive truths. This was not merely data, it was a declaration of war. He carried a disposable coffee cup, a prop in this grim play. The words felt thick in my throat. He nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. Intricate, you always were thorough. Thorough enough to lose everything, I countered, a bitter edge to my tone. Was this the right path? Had I misjudged him? What if this was another trap, a more sophisticated one? The die was cast. This is it, I said, pulling the USB from my pocket. It felt like a stone, dense with consequence. Everything. The shell corporations. The specific transaction ID linking the Cayman Bank to the Delaware holding company. The names of the directors. It's all in there, encrypted. I've prepped a blind drop for a journalist at the Chronicle. It's set to go public in 12 hours. Enough time for you to authenticate the data, not enough for them to shut it down completely once it hits the wire. I explained the mechanism, a series of cascading emails, triggered by a dead man's switch I'd rigged. If I didn't check in every 4 hours, the system would assume the worst and release everything. He studied me, his gaze penetrating. You're burning all your bridges, Thomas. There are no bridges left, I replied, the truth a raw ache. Only a cliff, and I'm taking them with me. A gust of wind whipped through the rest stop, rattling the empty bins, carrying with it the scent of gasoline and damp earth. The detective nodded slowly, tucking the drive into an inner pocket. You've given us a fighting chance. As he turned to leave, a thought sharp and unwelcome pierced my carefully constructed resolve. His words, you always were thorough, echoed. Had he known all along? Had he been watching, waiting for me to build this case, for me to expose myself? The way he accepted the drive, almost too easily, too calmly. What if I wasn't just exposing the syndicate, but also a deeper corruption? One that extended to the very people I was trusting. The meticulousness I prided myself on, the very trait he complimented, could also be my undoing. This suspicion, a bitter seed, took root in my mind. But the plan was in motion. The digital bomb was armed. I watched him drive away, the sedan disappearing into the stream of traffic. The first phase was complete, the trap was set, but the hunt had only just begun. The cool night air, still clinging to the highway rest stop, felt like a judgment. His words, "You always were thorough," echoed, a metallic taste on my tongue. The casual ease with which the drive had been accepted, the flicker in his eyes it gnawed at me. Had he known? Had he been a pawn or worse, a player in a game I was only just beginning to comprehend? My mind, a meticulous ledger, tried to reconcile the transaction, the veiled compliment, with the stark reality of the impending confrontation. A cold certainty settled in my gut. The true battle lay ahead, and the fight for transparency would be mine alone, even if the path I'd chosen had been silently observed, perhaps even engineered, by forces I couldn't yet name. The polished marble floors of the Sterling Tower's grand ballroom reflected the chandelier's opulent glow, 1,000 tiny suns mocking the darkness I carried within. The air hummed with hushed conversations, and the clinking of champagne flutes the false bonhomie of the firm's annual shareholders' conference. This was their stage, their sanctuary, where reputations were burnished and inconvenient truths swept beneath plush carpets. Tonight I would rip the carpet away. My hands, usually steady as a surgeon's, felt a tremor as I adjusted the microphone. The spotlight, intended for the executive chairman's opening remarks, now found me. An unexpected, unwelcome interruption. A ripple of confusion spread through the assembled faces, the investors, the press, the firm's own leadership. Their smiles, carefully constructed for public consumption, faltered, replaced by a growing unease. I saw the managing director, a man whose tailored suits concealed a viper's cunning, stiffen in his seat. Beside him, the executive chairman, his face a mask of practiced benevolence, slowly lowered his glass. "Good evening," my voice, though tight, resonated through the hall, amplified by the sound system. A few murmurs. "My name is Thomas. I am, or perhaps was, a forensic accountant here." A collective gasp. The managing director's eyes narrowed, a silent command passing to a burly security head by the main entrance. I had seconds. For months, I continued, projecting an authority I barely felt. I have been sifting through ledgers, tracing transactions, untangling a web of deceit far grander than any of us could have imagined. I gestured to the colossal projection screen behind me, usually reserved for quarterly profits and future projections. Tonight, I present not a forecast, a reckoning. On the screen, a complex flowchart bloomed, connecting shell corporations, offshore accounts, familiar names within the firm's hierarchy. My fingers flew across the keyboard, bringing up spreadsheets, bank statements, encrypted communications. Each line of data, each coded transfer, was a brick in the wall I had painstakingly built, exposing a money laundering operation of staggering scale, siphoning billions through the very arteries of this esteemed institution. "These are not anomalies," I declared, my voice gaining strength, "but deliberate, systemic actions. The funds, traced through a labyrinth of dummy companies from the Caribbean to Eastern Europe, originated from sources that deal not in legitimate commerce, but in human suffering, in illicit trade, in violence." A flurry of movement. The executive chairman slammed his fist on the table. "This is outrageous. Slander, security, remove this man." But I had anticipated this. As the security head began to move, a pre-programmed sequence initiated. The data, the raw, undeniable evidence, began to stream live across every major financial news outlet, simultaneously pushed to a secure server accessible by international authorities. A small green indicator light on my laptop winked. It was done. The information was out. There was no stopping it now. "You speak of slander," I challenged, my gaze locking onto the executive chairman, "but the numbers do not lie. Here, on page 37 of the Project Nightingale ledger, a code name I found buried deep within a forgotten server, we see a payment of 10 million, disguised as a consultancy fee to a shell entity in Panama. That entity, gentlemen, is controlled by a holding company whose beneficial owner is listed as J. Vance." I paused, letting the name hang in the air. A name I believe shared by the managing director's maternal grandfather. The managing director's face, usually composed, contorted into a mask of pure fury. "You have no proof. This is fabricated." "Oh, I do," I countered, a cruel twist of irony in my voice. The very individual I met at the highway rest stop, exchange point, just last night, the one who accepted a decoy drive from me, Unaware that the real evidence was already scheduled for dissemination, he provided the final, unwitting piece of the puzzle. A ripple went through the crowd. Some faces showed sudden horror, others outright disbelief. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the managing director's shoulders. He had been betrayed, exposed by a loose end, a connection I had suspected but only confirmed hours ago. The J. Vance detail, a personal touch, a familial legacy of deceit, had been the final key, provided by a carefully crafted conversation during that tense handover, meant to provoke a specific response. My doubt about the individual at the rest stop, the unsettling feeling that he knew too much, had led me to plant a subtle query. A tripwire in our exchange. His casual mention of the old man's legacy had confirmed my suspicion. The contact hadn't been an ally, he'd been an unwitting conduit, perhaps a desperate man tied to the syndicate, trying to save his own skin by providing just enough information to keep me on the hook, not realizing I was already closing the net. The doors at the back of the ballroom burst open. Uniformed officers, their presence a stark contrast to the glittering decor, streamed in. Their badges gleamed under the chandeliers, reflecting the unblinking eye of justice. My body, taut with adrenaline for weeks, suddenly felt heavy, as if gravity had intensified its pull. The air, once thick with tension, now vibrated with the crackle of police radios and the murmurs of a stunned crowd. The executive chairman and the managing director, once titans of industry, were now just two men, trapped in the unforgiving glare of the truth. My mission was complete. The numbers had finally spoken. The silence that followed the executive chairman's sudden horror was heavier than any shout. It pressed down, a physical weight, on every shoulder in the opulent boardroom. My gaze, though tired, remained fixed on the managing director, whose shoulders now sagged, a puppet with its strings cut. Betrayal, a bitter draught, had been poured for him, and I, Thomas, had been the silent hand. Then, the dam broke, not with a roar, but with the hushed, urgent voices of the security detail, now no longer mere guards, but enforcers of a swift, cold justice. A senior partner, his face a mask of disbelief, was next, his protests a weak, reedy sound against the determined stride of the officers. I watched, a strange detachment settling over me, as the edifice I had spent years meticulously examining began to crumble before my eyes. The chief investigator, a woman whose calm demeanor belied a steel core, met my gaze across the room. A slight nod, almost imperceptible, passed between us, a silent acknowledgement of a battle won, but the war, I knew, still raged in unseen corners. My muscles, coiled for so long in perpetual tension, began to unravel, leaving behind an ache that resonated deep in my bones. I spent the next hours in a sterile, temporary office within the firm's building, dictating the labyrinthine details of the scheme to a pair of attentive forensic specialists. Each number, each ledger entry, each coded email I recounted was a stone in the foundation of the case against them. My voice, though weary, held a newfound authority, an echo of the transformation I had undergone. It was a strange vindication, seeing my meticulous work, once dismissed as paranoia, now treated as gospel. The data streams, the shell corporations, the phantom transactions all laid bare, stripped of their deceptive cloaks. Outside, the firm itself became a theater of unfolding scandal. News vans, like predatory birds, descended upon the street below, their cameras' hungry lenses fixed on the grand entrance. Colleagues, some of whom had eyed me with suspicion, now scurried through the halls, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and confusion. The managing director, the senior partner, a vice president, the names echoed, each one a hammer blow to the firm's carefully constructed image. I saw the executive chairman, his face grim, addressing a huddle of remaining leaders, his voice a low rumble I couldn't decipher, but the weight of his posture spoke volumes. The firm, once a titan, now tottered on the brink. It was a strange relief, an abstract concept I could grasp intellectually, but struggled to feel emotionally. The cost, I knew, went far beyond a tarnished reputation. The sleepless nights, the constant vigilance, the gnawing fear for my family, those scars would linger, etched deeper than any headline. Was it worth it? Days later, the initial storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape of professional devastation. The firm's stock plummeted, its future uncertain. I received a summons, a discreet note tucked under my office door, requesting my presence at a specific location. No firm letterhead, no official seals. Just a time and a grid reference. The tension, though dulled, had not entirely vanished. The drive was long, the highway stretching into the twilight. I arrived at the designated spot, a highway rest stop, exchange point, a desolate stretch of asphalt, and a small, shuttered convenience store, bathed in the anemic glow of a single sodium lamp. As I pulled my own vehicle alongside it, the passenger door opened. It was the chief investigator, her silhouette framed against the fading light. She motioned for me to join her in the back seat. The driver, a broad-shouldered individual whose presence radiated quiet vigilance, remained impassive. "Thomas," he began, his voice low, almost a murmur against the hum of the distant traffic. "Your information was invaluable. The arrests at the firm were just the beginning." I felt a familiar tightening in my chest. "The beginning?" She leaned forward, her eyes catching the faint light from the rest stop. "We've leveraged the data you provided. The managing director's encrypted communications, which you painstakingly pieced together, led us to a series of offshore accounts that weren't just for the firm's scheme." A chill went through my spine, a sensation far removed from the cold wind outside. "What are you saying?" "We've tracked the money. It's a spiderweb, Thomas, far more intricate than we first imagined. Your firm was a node, a significant one, yes, but only a node. The funds were flowing through a network of shell companies, not just for domestic illicit activities, but for international arms dealing, human trafficking, and even funding for rogue states." The air in the car grew heavy, suffocating. My initial doubt, the fleeting thought that I had only made a small ripple, now evaporated, replaced by a horrifying clarity. This wasn't just about corporate fraud. It was about something monstrous, something that spanned continents and dealt in lives. We've initiated a series of coordinated raids across 3 continents in the last 48 hours. My meticulous work has crippled a significant arm of what we now confirm is a major international syndicate. A major international syndicate. The words echoed in the enclosed space, painting a picture of an enemy far vaster, far more ruthless than I could have ever conceived from the confines of my audit reports. I had been digging into a local borough, only to find it was a mere entrance to an underground city. The firm's scandal, immense as it was a single thread in a tapestry woven with global malice. The immediate fallout was contained, yes, but the consequences of what I had unearthed, the ripple effects, were still spreading, an unseen tide across the world. The air at the highway rest stop, exchange point, hummed with a low, mechanical drone, a symphony of distant engines and the rustle of leaves in the unseen woods beyond the asphalt. My breath hitched, a shallow, ragged thing in my throat. I stood by the rear bumper of my car, the cool metal a faint anchor against the tremor that threatened to seize my limbs. The digital drive, a cold weight in my palm, felt heavier than any ledger I had ever balanced. Every shadow seemed to stretch and writhe. Every passing vehicle a potential threat, its headlights momentarily carving the darkness before receding into the night. The agreed-upon time crawled by, each second a leaden tick against the frantic beat of my own pulse. I scanned the lot, my gaze darting from the garish glow of the vending machines to the solitary figure hunched over a coffee cup inside the brightly lit convenience store. My wife and child were safe, 100 miles away, their faces etched into the forefront of my mind, a shield against the creeping fear. The driver, a man I recognized only from hushed conversations and a fleeting, grainy photograph, emerged. He moved with an economical grace, his eyes, even from this distance, sharp and assessing. The agent. He wore no uniform, no badge, just the quiet authority of someone who had navigated the same treacherous waters I had just barely survived. "Thomas," he answered, his voice a low current beneath the ambient hum as he approached. He didn't offer a hand, a gesture I appreciated. Familiarity was a luxury I couldn't afford. "Agent," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. I extended the drive. He took it, his fingers brushing mine for a fraction of a second, a fleeting transfer of immense consequence. He nodded, a curt, almost imperceptible movement. "This is everything. Every ledger, every transaction, every shell company I could trace," I confirmed, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. The full scope of it. They were using the firm as a front, a legitimate facade for staggering sums. He turned the drive over in his hand, a small black rectangle holding the fate of a vast criminal enterprise. "My work has been," instrumental, more than I know. His eyes met mine, a flicker of something akin to admiration or perhaps just grim understanding. The local bureau I found was indeed just one tentacle, a major international syndicate. The sheer audacity, the intricate web of deception had once seemed insurmountable. Now it was a data point, a case file soon to be dismantled. "They won't forget," I responded, the warning hanging heavy in the air. "We know," he replied, his gaze unwavering, "but neither will we. You'll be safe. Your family will be safe. We've taken precautions." He paused, then added, "Changed, Thomas, from the accountant who first sent us those encrypted messages." I felt the truth of his observation deep within me. The meticulous number cruncher, the man who once found solace in the absolute certainty of figures, had been forged anew in the crucible of fear and defiance. I had doubted myself, questioned my sanity, my judgment, more times than I could count. The sedan's engine purred to life, its taillights receding into the endless ribbon of the highway. I stood there, watching until it was a mere pinprick of red light, then gone. The digital drive, and the weight of its contents, was no longer mine to bear. Months later, the quiet rhythm of our new lives was a balm. We were far from the city, nestled in a small, unassuming town where the loudest sound was the rustle of wind through ancient trees. My wife, though still bearing the invisible scars of our ordeal, had found a new strength, a fierce protectiveness that had always been there but was now fully unveiled. Our child, oblivious to the storm we had weathered, laughed freely in the sun-dappled yard, building castles of sand, symbols of a future we were carefully, lovingly constructing. I found myself in a small, windowless office, the air thick with the scent of old paper and the hum of a server rack. The work was different now, the stakes equally high, but the purpose clear, unequivocal. The ledgers I now scrutinized were often mundane, but the narratives they sometimes hinted at, the small injustices they sometimes revealed, felt profoundly significant. A colleague, a woman with keen eyes and an even keener mind, slid a new file across my desk. "Another one, Thomas. Looks like a classic case of public funds diverted to a ghost corporation." I picked up the file, its crisp pages a fresh challenge. My fingers, once accustomed to the soft click of a calculator, now moved with a different kind of precision across the keyboard, tracing digital footprints. But it no longer governed me. It was a scar, not a fresh wound. I looked out the small window, though it offered only a view of a brick wall. My life had been irrevocably altered, the meticulous, predictable lines of my past erased. But in their place, a new horizon had emerged, uncertain yet undeniably vibrant. I had traded the quiet comfort of ignorance for the stark, demanding clarity of truth. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a quiet, hard-earned peace. The numbers still told a story, but now I was helping write a better ending.